So what is a complex sentence? So I'm going to help you understand exactly what a complex sentence is. I'm going to give you examples, and I'm also going to give you some practice questions that you can do on your own. So let's begin. So what are complex sentences? So complex sentences are created when you combine an independent and a dependent clause. So if you remember, an independent clause is a clause or a sentence that can stand on its own. For example, I walked to the movie, period. That doesn't really rely on any other sentence. It can stand on its own. Now, a dependent clause is a sentence that can stand on its own. So, although I arrived for the test, that's a dependent clause. Um, you can see that it needs another sentence or a main clause or an independent clause to help complete the sentence. So, although I arrived for the test, the teacher didn't allow me to finish the test. Period. So, for complex sentences, you combine a dependent clause and an independent clause, and you usually use a comma or you don't use a comma depending on the situation. So the examples I've provided here are: because I was late for the test, comma, the teacher refused to let me do the test. So the first sentence, because I was late for the test, that's the dependent clause. And it's a dependent clause because it starts off with the subordinated conjunction because. Now, you don't necessarily have to use subordinated conjunction. You can use a relative conjunction as well. But for this one, we're using a subordinated conjunction. So because I was late for the test, depends on another sentence. It can't stand on its own. So the sentence that completes it is the next sentence. The teacher refused to let me do the test. Now, the next sentence is the teacher refused to let me do the test because I was late for the test. Now, this is the same sentence, but the two sentences are flipped. So now you have the main clause or the independent clause starting the sentence, and then you have the dependent clause finishing the sentence. Now, I just want to make sure as well, um, when you understand complex sentences, I want you to understand also how to punctuate complex sentences. So if you're starting off with a subordinating conjunction, so like because I was late for the test, you want to use a comma and then write your deep independent clause. So because I was late for the test, comma, the teacher refused to let me do the test. Now, if you start off with the main clause or the independent clause, then you don't need to use a comma if the subordinating clause comes next. So as in the second sentences here, we have the teacher refused to let me do the test. That's the independent clause, and then the dependent clause comes right after. So in that case, you don't have to use comma to separate the two sentences. All right. So I'm going to give you a couple practice exercises here. You can pause the video and go through them, and I'll give you the answers in the next screen. All right. So here are the answers. So again, you can see here, for the first sentence, you're starting off with a subordinated conjunction or the dependent clause. I apologize, the dependent clause. So because I did not finish the food on my plate, comma, my mom refused to give me more food. So since you started off with the subordinate clause, you're going to use a comma and then continue with the main clause. Now the next sentence is, my mom refused to give me more food because I did not finish the food on my plate. Now in this case, you didn't need to use a comma because you started off with the main clause and then continued with the dependent clause. The next one is, unless I pay my rent this month, starting off with a subordinate clause or dependent clause, then you use a comma, I will be evicted from my apartment. Again, we flip the sentences. You start off with the main clause for the next sentence. So I will be evicted from my apartment. No comma necessary. And then you continue with the dependent clause. All right. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe, share, and like the video. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments.